salutations, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. Today we are doing podcast number 2. After the first episode, I did get a couple of questions and comments over the video, and I have chosen one question to go with today. This is from actually my good friend, Connor Firstman. It's a friend of mine here at school. We're in the same program together. We work together. He's awesome. He's not a big Power Ranger fan like I am, but he did have something he wanted to discuss on the show today. And basically he put favorite villains, best, worst, and why is that? And so I decided to make a short list of what I feel to be the best villains and the worst villains of Power Rangers history, all the way up to Megaforce. However, I'm not counting Megaforce because simply it hasn't gone through a full series yet, so it seems a little unfair to even go ahead and count those guys. The interesting thing is, it was a lot easier for me to go ahead and find a list of good villains than it was for me to find a list of bad villains. And I really think that's kind of a testament to the series on how good their villains are. Granted, they're not well-rounded, as a lot of other villains are. I mean, to be honest, not many of these are, say, Gold Dukat caliber or Khan caliber, Star Trek being an obvious example right there. But I do think there is a lot of worth and value out of these villains, and it's really hard to go wrong with them. Now, basically what I did is I compiled these lists not of, like, the Monster a Day villains, so you're not going to see people like King Sphinx or anybody like that on this list. I'm talking about the main core villains. I've done the top 5 for each, the worst and top 5 of the best here. And, yeah, I'm going to say a little bit about them and go from there, basically. Now I'm going to go ahead and start with the best villains. I have 5 specific ones I'd like to go ahead and talk about. But, in general, the villains that I love are like, Goldar and Rito. Those guys were great, even though Goldar kind of got a little bit more comical as the series kind of went on. I definitely enjoyed Scorpina. She was very enigmatic, and it'd been nice if they would have brought her back in the second season that they had originally planned to. But more specifically, the ones I got on my list, I really enjoyed Prince Gaskin Archerina. I thought that was a great sub-story for Zeo towards the end right there. Villamax, his character development from his introduction up to his betrayal of Trakina, that was really great. I enjoyed that. Dark Honda, treacherous villains like him and Deviant is also up there. Almost kind of one the same since they went back, back to back in the series and all that. But really like both of those guys, they're kind of the same. Queen Banshira. Best thing about her, I thought, was that, and it's been said that the Lightspeed Rescue villains don't really have that much depth to them, but the best thing about Banshira really was at the end, in the sense that she betrayed her own men, and that's what ultimately defeated her. It really wasn't the Rangers that defeated her. It was her own ambition and the way that she treated her soldiers. So that was the kind of thing that stopped her at the end. Because it was never the Rangers that stopped her. It was Diabolico. He was the one that ultimately, quote-unquote, killed her, trapped her in the shower, however you want to look at it. And I just thought that was kind of interesting. Now, specifically, again, to my 5 best villains right here, and I'm not going to go in any particular order, just I wrote them down here. They may be chronological, I'm not quite sure right here, but here's the first one I want to talk about. I want to talk about Lord Zed. Wow. The first time I saw this guy on television, I was scared. Granted, I was about 7, 8 years old, but man, he just looks the part, he sounds the part, he's menacing, and as Linkara pointed out in his series, he is really thinking out of the box. This was the villain that ultimately defeated the Green Ranger. This was the villain who first tried to do evil Rangers, which ultimately failed. And he had his own Zord that could destroy planets. And, when he first came in, he was cold, he was calculating, he was just a badass, if I can go ahead and say anything. You just look at this guy, he means business. And the best thing I like is really in his introduction. Yeah, he kind of comes out of nowhere, and we get this little backstory about him and everything. What's really great, and I'm trying to think of the word here, but the Rangers come in. They see the monster like business as usual. We can beat this guy, the Piranha said specifically. They bring out the dinosaurs, and what happens? Completely destroyed, defeated, however it exactly happens there since they're frozen. And Lord Zed has matched them. The only reason they got out of that situation is they just had stronger Zords and the Thunder Zords. But Zed, he was just so much fun. And I will agree, he got a little, when he married Rita, that was kind of out of left field for me. If anything, I think they probably should have teamed up. And the thing I hear about this guy is parents were complaining he was too evil. And once again, I got to quote Linkara, what were you expecting? Did you expect a giant bunny rabbit with eggs to be their villain? I mean, it's just odd to me that the parents seem to have more say over what's in Power Rangers than the actual fans of the show. And I thought, Lord Zed, if they would have kept him the same level the entire series, that would have been great. That would have been awesome. And really kind of build him up, because the only downside to Zed eventually we get to is that when he's dethroned by the Machine Empire, that's fun. I love the Camper of Doom. I thought those were all fun and all that, but ultimately when we find out that he's like a servant of Dark Spectre, it really kind of loses its edge when you look back to the Mutiny Part 1 in his introductory episode. So, a little bit of that sting is taken away. There is still a mystique about him. And, he's just overall fun villain. I'm going to go ahead and move on now. The next one I have on my list is Frax from Time Force. This is probably the darkest villain origin up to that point. And really just, you didn't see it coming. So, spoilers, and I'm sorry, this is going to be full of spoilers, but if you haven't seen Power Rangers by now, then you're missing something good. But Frax befriended Rancic, gave him the serum to basically keep him alive, and then Rancic betrays him and basically kills Frax, or at this point, Dr. Fredericks, kills the doctor, and then he rebuilds himself as a robot. Now, whether he's a cyborg or not, you really can't tell. But what's great about this is that he just starts as the generic robotic helper, just there to do whatever Rancic says, but then he comes up with his own agenda. He gets his own personal army. He cuts Rancic off from the drug that he needs, reveals himself as this figure from the past, and he's got this agenda of his not only to defeat Rancic, pay him back for what he did to him, but he's gone mad to the point to where he wants to rule the world with robots. And yeah, it may sound cliche and all that, but that was what I thought was so interesting about Time Force, is once they kind of revealed that about Frax, it just got so much more interesting. Because, personally, I'm not a big fan on time travel and all that. And while Time Force was a very solid season and all that, I think Frax was probably the best part of it. They really could have done more with him, I think, ultimately. But I think their focus was always on Rancic and what they were going to do with him. But Frax, again, it's really the first example that I can think of, and I'll have to double check on this, but really the first example of a tragic villain, of somebody who was good, had great intentions. He helped someone in need. He didn't care about race or anything like that. And then what happens? He's betrayed. And the whole reason he goes mad is because he's become a robot, a cyborg. And then he's just so demented in the things that he does. It's really quite amazing. I love this character. His turn of heart at the end, I think when he's captured, it works. I don't really have a problem with it because it really helps fuel Nadira and all that, and ultimately redeeming her father. And that's what it's about. It's the redemption of Rancic. But man, just to see him die at the end, literally die, I don't know who that got past, but I like that. I thought that was really good. So yeah, one of the better aspects of Time Force, and just a really great deep villain. The next I have on the list here is the Psycho Rangers. Wow. So when I talk about Zed having that team of evil Rangers, the Psycho Rangers really hit the nail on the head with it. And it was like every episode they were always getting the advantage over the Rangers. They were defeating them in some way. I really think they could have done more with this, but much like Frax, the focus of the villains was not the Psycho Rangers, but it was Astronema. And again, at this point in the series, she's trying to betray Dark Spectre. Andros is aware that she is his sister, and she's full Locutus of Borg at this point. And I just think the best thing about them is that they are driven by this obsession. Something I'm learning in screenwriting at the moment is your protagonist must always want something, and every scene must drive to them achieving that goal. And when I think of the Psycho Rangers, everything that they're trying to do is to kill their counterpart. Psycho Yellow, all she cares about is killing the Yellow Ranger, no matter what. Whether that means that she has to defeat the other Psycho Rangers, she has to kill normal citizens, she's just got to go ahead and kill them. She's got to get to the Yellow Ranger. And sounds almost like that Wile E. Coyote cartoon, in the sense that, well, what are you going to do once you go ahead and capture them, you know? It seems like, I don't know the word for it right here, but it's like it's like a never-ending quest, never-ending journey for the Psycho Rangers. And I find it even more interesting that when they come back in Lost Galaxy, that, first of all, they do seem a little bit less powerful, but I have kind of theories into that as it is. But they're really just interested, because Psycho Pink is just after a Pink Ranger, not necessarily Cassie. She's after a Pink Ranger, whether it's Kendricks or Dana down the line or Kimberly. It just seems like they're only programmed to kill Rangers. And I like that. They really have no other motive. They have no other wants and desires. Just kill the Rangers. And that single-mindedness could get boring after a while. But the fact is, they are essentially evil Power Rangers. They are twisted. They are disturbed. And they'll do anything. It kind of makes you wish the series could have gone a little bit darker to explore that as far as what they are capable of doing just to get to the Rangers. But for what we got, I mean, very great arc in the series. It really paid off, I think. The whole ghost thing and the afterlife of the villains, that's a little iffy. But again, definitely liked how it carried over in the Lost Galaxy, especially with Psycho Pink, actually killing Kendricks, which is another wow moment for the series, and courtesy of the Psycho Rangers. Moving on. Next villain I want to say, Zenaku. Now, there are a lot of people out there who don't like Wild Force. I don't think I'll ever understand why. But one of the best things about Wild Force was the villains. Not so much Master Org, but Toxica, Jinrax, Jindrax, I can't speak tonight, Onakage, those guys were just great. And the cherry on the top was definitely Zenaku. First appearance is in like the last 5 minutes of an episode. He utterly beats the Rangers, steals the Elephant Wild Zord. And then we see him next time. He's got his own Zords. He's super fast. He's cunning. It's just awesome. And as many point out, there are parallels between him and Tommy with the Evil Zord, the flute, and all this kind of stuff. But what gets better is we find out that it is Merrick, who's been placed under a spell. And there are two schools of mind on Zenaku and kind of what it is. The first is that the mask itself is an evil spirit that has possessed Merrick, which I think is present in the dialogue. But the other school of thought is that the mask is bringing out the dark inhibitions within Merrick and has formed into Zanaku, which has consumed him. Now, not getting too much into, the theories behind it and stuff, I always kind of lean towards it brings out the dark inhibitions within him, simply because as Zanaku, he has feelings. He has thoughts for the princess and feelings towards her, doesn't really want to harm her, helps Alyssa, heals her in the woods and all that. So it makes more sense to me that it is a dark part of Merrick's psyche that is manifested because of this mask. And it makes all more sense when Zanaku returns, not the first time, but the second time. Because once the wolf mask is destroyed and somehow is reconstructed, he does go after Merrick. He is defeated. But in the end of the Power Rangers, Zanaku comes back. And Zanaku, for lack of a better description here, really seems like he's trying to atone for his sins. He wants to follow Merrick. I think he calls him friend in that. I have to rewatch it and all that. But I just like the idea of this character who, any villain that can match the entire Ranger team, has a dark history, has his own set of Zords and Megazord, that's always great in my book. And it was always fun to watch him. And I thought one of my favorite scenes, and I wish I could remember the name of the specific episode, is where he's walking down the tunnel playing his flute. All you can see is the yellow eyes. And then we kind of zoom in, and then he's revealed, and it's like, wow. I did a music video years and years ago that had that particular scene. And I just love that. So yeah, Zanaku, great villain. Now I know I said I'd do 5 here, but I want to go ahead and talk about 2 more villains from my best list, which I do believe deserve certain recognition. First I want to talk about Korag. Korag the Nightwolf. That is like the coolest villain name in the series since Zanaku, I think. Now, the obvious criticism I've heard for Korag, the obvious criticism I've heard for Korag is that he's essentially Darth Vader in Power Rangers. And that's fair criticism. I agree with that. We have a hero who has fallen to the dark side, been consumed by it, got this armor to hide his identity, fights his son, takes his son into the dark side, and ultimately comes over to the good side. Granted, Liam Bo's story, which is Korag's human identity, is a lot happier than that of Darth Vader, no doubt there. But I thought this story worked really well in Power Rangers. Again, I liked Mystic Force. It's not one of the better series, but it's not one of the bad series. I'll say that's kind of somewhere in the middle of my mind. And I just like this whole thing about we have this villain who has this strict code of honor. He has a set of morals, not attacking defenseless enemies, and all that good stuff. I just think that villains like that are always more complex, because it seems that Korag, and I could be wrong here, but it just seems, in my point of view, that Korag is a villain who doesn't consider himself a villain. And those are the best, where he can justify that what he's doing is right. Now, mind you, the Korag is just a brainwashed Liam Bo, which is really just kind of got morals obscured, basically. But that doesn't take away from it. I mean, he fights the Rangers. He's very noble, and I just love the scene where in Dark Wish, he plants his sword in the ground, and he's like, he doesn't want to fight. And then the next thing happens, Nick just tries to take the sword and attack him. And I forget what was said next, but then Nick's just kind of like, and you guys didn't let me take the sword, why? Something like that. I really should have watched these episodes, but I'm just remembering from memory that's like my favorite part of Dark Wish, even though Dark Wish ultimately doesn't make any sense when you really sit and think about it. Nevertheless, I like Korag. I love the fact that he's even got this rivalry within the group of villains against everybody. He's the ultimate servant, but he sees flaws in the others that prevent those other villains from being worthy of serving the master. I just think that's really great. And even with War Max, I love that line, you fight, you live without honor, and you fall without honor. Would have been better if he said die, but again, this is Power Rangers owned by Disney, and yeah, they're not going to let them say that. And one more thing about Korag is, again, when he turns to good, I think it's great. Goes against the villains. And of course, I think the best scene towards the end there is him fighting Nick, who has been corrupted the same way by the Master, and fighting in the purple armor, and Liam Bo's fighting in the red armor. They really probably could have done a lot better with that scene, maybe a little bit more choreography, less wire work. But for what it is, I like that father versus son. Yes, it's contrived because he's under a spell and all that, but it works. I think it does. I've never heard anybody say it doesn't work in the context of the series. But yeah, I really like Korag. And the last of my best villains is going to be the A Squad. Okay, so the A Squad, we don't know a damn thing about these guys. We don't even know their names. Yeah, those are fan names out there, and I'm probably going to just call them those. But we have a team of Power Rangers who are established as the best of the best. This is your standard Power Ranger team. They do everything. They win. They get all the praise and all that, and then they disappear for the entire series. And then we see them at the end, 2 or 3 episodes out, and they've turned evil. No indication that they're under an evil spell. They just turned evil. That they believe in Grum's cause or Omni or whoever. Now there is that lack of motivation. It's not really explained. Charlie or SPD A Squad Red basically says they're on the winning side and all that. But I can just think of so many story potentials with these characters and how they really contrast B Squad. And frankly, with the way SPD turned out, I really would have liked to have followed the A Squad, whether that be in their early days or the time they went missing up until the time they turned evil. I just think that's a far better story. Granted, the B Squad coming together is always an interesting story with the underdogs and whatnot, but just to follow a team of evil Rangers and to see them turn evil, what makes them turn evil, I mean, that just seems like so many story potentials. It'd be so interesting, so dynamic. It just seems like it'd be fun. Now, I didn't necessarily put these guys saying they're the best villains, because again, it's more about potentially what they can become. But it's still great. I still love the ending where, yeah, they ultimately go against Broodwing, they go against Grum, they go against Omni and all that, but they go against the A Squad first. And of course, it's against themselves in a sense. It's against another team of Rangers, which is really kind of unheard of other than the evil teams. But again, this was a team that was good, that was turned evil, and that was just great. And if I may offer, before I end right here on the good heroes, they really should have kind of explained what happened, and I believe that it's got to be mind control, because Omni has done that with everybody else. It's really implied with Grum. It obviously happened with Mora. But either way, I think whether it's mind control or they did it for whatever reason, I think it works, and I think they are really the scariest villains in Power Rangers just because of that. All right, now, again, it was really hard to get the worst villains, but the ones that I did get for worst, they are really, really bad. So no particular order here, but I'm going to go ahead and start with Jared and Camille. And I guess, in a broader sense, it goes back to Daishi, Weiger, Scourge, pretty much the Jungle Fury villains. I don't like Jungle Fury. I really don't. That was kind of the beginning of the end of, I think, good quality Power Rangers, but I'll get into that later. The thing about these guys really goes back to me watching the Sentai. Now, I saw Jungle Fury before I saw Gecky Ranger. And I really thought that these villains were good. They were decent, nothing really special, but they were good. Then I saw Gecky Ranger. And I fell in love with Rio, Melee, and Long. Those are like the three greatest villains that I've seen in a long time on any television show. I mean, like up to par again with Gul Dukat and Khan and General Chang and those great Star Trek villains. Because Star Trek villains are always good if they're written right, like those three are. The best thing about Rio and Melee is that they are manipulated by a god who's just bored. That's the basis of the series. It gets really dark on how Rio's life was completely twisted and set on a certain path for him to become this Lord of Darkness, basically. And Melee's, devotion to Rio for being her savior and then the person who resurrected her. I mean, it was great. And I'd probably do a whole video about the villains of Geiki Ranger. But what we're talking about is Jared and Camille. And these guys... Jared, first of all, when we first get introduced to him, he's like Robin from Batman and Robin. How the Scouser Craig do it? I mean, he sounds like that. Granted, he's got a legitimate complaint against Casey, and I would too if I lost anything to Casey from Jungle Fury. But it's not like he's really the villain. It's really established within the first episode is that Daishi, the spirit that's been contained for centuries, is inhabiting his body. So the villain that we're watching the entire time is Daishi. The problem is Daishi's being tempered by Jared's humanity, which is interesting towards the end when Daishi tries to separate from Jared to, where he's not so weak anymore. And at least that's how I look at it there. But he makes so many mistakes. He doesn't do... For an all-powerful dragon being that's been locked up for centuries, he really has an odd approach to doing things. And, in the sense of Geiki Ranger made sense, but just when we put these elements of Jared and Daishi together, it's really watered down. And that's my major complaint, is that these villains are watered down. Now, some people are going to say it's unfair to compare Geiki Ranger to Jungle Fury, and I will agree in principle with that. However, the writers for Jungle Fury are aware of the stories from Geiki Ranger and of these characters, and I'm willing to bet money that they saw some Geiki Ranger episodes. And they take this great character in Rio, this twisted, troubled character, and really put it into a character in Jared Daishi who don't have that interesting backstory. There's nothing interesting about Jared as a character. There's nothing really interesting about Daishi because we don't know anything about him really. And it just doesn't work. What also doesn't work is Camille. Because she doesn't really have that devotion that Melee did, or that comical presence, or the deadly look in her eyes that Melee did. And I just adored those things about that character. I loved how Melee was completely devoted to her savior. I mean, it's really equal to one who loves Jesus in the sense, you died for my sins, I will follow you through eternity. Melee is the same way. Maybe these characters could have been saved if they had actually died at the end, like Rio and Melee. But again, it's Disney-era Power Rangers, so that necessarily wasn't going to go ahead and happen, at least there. And that really, again, those guys just bothered me. And I guess what's worse is Scorch and Weiger. Because Scorch is supposed to be Long's battle form, this eternal god who manipulates things and people for his own benefit that can't be killed but can only be trapped. And Scorch is just reduced to a generic kind of villain character with no discernible qualities. Same thing with Weiger. I mean, Weiger is Jan's father reincarnated into a white tiger monster. That's awesome. Because it gives connection for the hero for him to fight his own father. Again, back to the whole Darth Vader thing. But then he's just a generic villain, and not really much about him. And I guess that's the thing about it. There was so much potential for these villains, and I've been fine if they just copy and pasted the Japanese version, but that would have been asking for too much to get dynamic and interesting villains out of that particular season. Next one I have up is Elsa from Dino Thunder. I don't get this chick at all. She just kind of randomly comes out of nowhere as far as her origin. She's picked up by Mesogog, who is a strong villain. I like Mesogog. I like Zeltrax. The best thing about those guys is they have motives for what they're doing. Elsa doesn't have one. She's just programmed like a robot. And speaking of robots, we talked about Frax. Yeah, he's programmed, but he has motives. He has wants and desires and a revenge plot. Elsa has nothing. The only thing we see in her is that she has an attraction to Tommy, which is played up in the first few episodes and then paid off, I guess, in the final, which is just weird. But it really does play that she's a complete innocent character. When the power is taken from her, she doesn't have her memories of being Elsa and everything. She's just a normal, scared woman, and almost a stereotype in fact how weak and pathetic she is, basically. So again, nothing really interesting about her. There's also a mention in the series that she changed her appearance to be more attractive to Tommy, which is just ludicrous to me. I don't get that at all. That didn't make any sense. And of course, the whole Principal Randall thing. I like the idea of having her as the principal to watch over the Dino Thunder Rangers if she knows their identities, watch over Tommy, keep them in line. And, there really wasn't that I'm going to do this as a principal to prevent them from being Power Rangers, kind of mess them up that way. That never, ever occurred, to my knowledge, in there. And again, sorry, Linkara, I keep ripping off all your points, but you make really good ones. But like you said, it's not like a Clark Kent thing with her, Principal Randall and Elsa. It's just, I'm really evil as the bad guy, and I'm really evil as the principal. The only thing I got on is the glasses to tell the difference. And how Tommy couldn't figure that one out. PhD in paleontology, greatest ranger ever, can't tell that the principal that he interacts with every day is the same villain that he fights on the battlefield. So again, just really bland and nothing really about her. Now, the next villain I have on my list, I'm not really putting him on there for being the worst villain, but I just want to bring up this point about them that's just so absurd in my mind. And that's Master Xandred from Samurai and Super Samurai. So, he's a good villain, don't get me wrong, but what really bugs me is how empathetic he is. And, okay, let me kind of start here. He's basically the exact same character from Shinkenger, from this Japanese Sentai. So, no problem with the character. He's just kind of, again, watered down, toned down, not as evil, I guess, and all that, even though he does the exact same things. But he just has doesn't have the edge to him that the Shinkenger villain had, which I can't even remember his proper Japanese name at the moment. But one of the things that they changed that I just find that's so interesting is that in Shinkenger, the villain would always be drinking sake. Basically, he'd be getting drunk. And that would be like one of the reasons why he never went face them, is he was always drunk, he was never at full strength and all that kind of stuff. Well, Saban said, we can't have a drunk villain in the series, so what are we going to replace the sake with? I got it, medicine. So, from the first episode, Xandred is drinks like, I want my medicine, and all that. And they're always pouring him his medicine. And it only took me 10 seconds to realize, so they've turned him from an alcoholic into a drug addict. I'm serious. He is always craving his medicine, always feels better when he drinks it, he overdoses. That's what he's doing. That's what he is. He is a drug addict. Power Ranger Samurai turned an alcoholic into a drug addict. Isn't that worse? Isn't that something that they really should have thought of when they were doing this series? I don't know. It's just, it's just so weird for me to sit down and see that one of the main antagonists of Power Rangers is a drug addict. Maybe there was a subliminal message there for children not to take drugs all the time, don't always take medicine. I don't know. But again, it's not that he's a terrible villain. I just wanted to make that particular point, and that is one of the odd things against him, is that he's just a drug addict for no damn good reason. So, moving on. Okay, these guys are good. From Ninja Store, Mara and Capri. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's been forever since I've seen Ninja Storm. And you can probably see a pattern here. I am naming pretty much Disney-era Power Ranger series with the exception of Xandrid. That's a special circumstance. I just don't think that Disney really knew how to handle these villains, which is odd because they have created some of the greatest villains in animated cinema. From Ursula to Scar and Jafar. Apparently, they didn't have anybody who's familiar with villains writing these guys. And yes, it's been said that Lothar is a terrible villain. He's a female Divatox. Sorry again, Linkara, but you made a good point. But these girls, first, whose parents are they? They refer to both Lothar as their uncle and Cam as their cousin. So what set of siblings are we missing in this equation of the want-to-be family? I don't get it. I don't know what we're missing right here. They are played up at the end as being smarter than what they were always. Like they were playing dumb the entire time. But if that's the case, why do they continue to play dumb even after they become good guys? I mean, they contribute nothing at all. They make the monsters grow, yeah, but Lothar could have done that. They are skilled fighters. We've seen in a few episodes, but they were really, really limited. And going back to the Sentai, those two, man, they were really evil. They were really despicable, and they were a real match for the Rangers. That is not what we are seeing here. I've never seen Hurricaneger. I just know those villains were evil mainly because of the crossover movie and whatnot and stuff. But man, they were just bad. And I'll cite the best example that I can give. Actually, I'll give two examples. One, they're painting Lothar's nails for some odd reason. Explanation for that, somebody? Yeah. You just can't make Lothar or these girls threatening when they're painting their nails in spare time. And second is from the Samurai's Journey, Part 3. Now, this was a three-part that really had a lot of things going for it. The second episode in that, perhaps one of the best episodes of Power Rangers ever. And again, that's saying something coming from the Disney era. But in Part 3, they have a talent show, beauty pageant, whatever, to pick a monster. And then they're doing this, like, fake newscast reporting on it and stuff. It just really doesn't mesh with what was established in the previous episode. I mean, if you took out all the samurai, Green Samurai Ranger parts out and just showed these like back-to-back to different audiences, that you would swear they were two different television shows altogether. And that was one of the main problems I think with Ninja Storm is they had very uneven tone, primarily with villains. I mean, hey, I love Vexicus and Modrone, Shimatsu, Zergain. Those guys were great. And yeah, Lothar had his moments and all that really towards the end. But these two characters, again, were said that they were playing dumb the whole time. And it just didn't work for me with the reveal. And even in the crossover that they did with Dino Thunder, still didn't work for me. I just don't know why they thought they had to put these characters in there and make them so dumb. I mean, I know comic relief villains have always been there since Squat and Babu, Finster to a lesser degree, Rio Revolto. But, hey, Rito was charming. Rito was fun. He was always a riot to watch and listen to. But these girls, ugh. Okay, moving on. So this is my last on the list, and I promise I'll go ahead and wrap this up. I know I'm twice as long as I was last week. But the absolute worst villains from Power Rangers history, in my opinion here, the entire RPM villain series. Now I'm going to be upfront here. I hate RPM. It is the worst Power Rangers series ever. Worse than Turbo, if you can believe it. And one of the major missteps here, major problems, was the villains. Now, this is a case where I did see Go-Onger first, but I am not comparing them to the Go-Onger villains. Go-Onger villains were stupid, they were dumb, they were funny. Hey, I have no problem with that whatsoever. Because Go-Onger was like Car Ranger in the sense that it was a parody of itself. And I knew that as soon as they did the G3 Princess. And I was like, I get it, it's still fun because it was still good characters, good story. RPM has very little, if any, redeeming qualities, and the villains really suffer. Now, I will grant say Venjix was good. I like Venjix. But the others, Kilobyte, Cruncher, Shifter, and Tanaya. Oh. Okay, let me kind of go one by one here. First, Cruncher and Shifter, I think it was Cruncher, yeah. Cruncher and Shifter, these guys are just idiots through and through. If the series had the same tone as Go-Onger, these guys would have been fine. I would have had no problem with them. But for a show that's trying to take itself seriously, or at least in most parts, these guys just don't fit. If this was Turbo, those guys would fit perfectly. Even if this was Power Rangers in space, these guys would have fit perfectly. And I guess to that is like you have to have a strong lead villain. And let's be honest, Venjix was not the lead villain. The attention was put on Tanaya. Tanaya 7, Tanaya 4.0, whatever number designations, because I don't care. I don't like this girl at all. Now, okay, I'll give credit where credit is due. I liked the story behind that she is Dylan's sister, that she was blind and then turned into a cyborg with no memories of her past. That's great. That is awesome. I love that. But I just don't like anything else about her. I mean, we have one whole episode where the gag is she takes off her hand and runs amok in the garage. No, that doesn't work. I mean, if that was the hand from the Adams family, then yeah, I could see that. But no. And then the episode Go for the Green, which I think is a crime against humanity in itself. And I'll point out the major problem with this. I mean, this is the show where they try to get the Green Ranger, and they have tryouts, and I use that term loosely, and Tanaya wants to become Green Ranger. And this is before she was really exposed as the villain, because prior we had seen her with her visor down so nobody could tell who she is. And it was great trying to infiltrate the Rangers, but I don't know. I can't really articulate what is so wrong with her and all that. It's just that she's got this great backstory, just poor execution by this character. Her relationship with her brother kind of pays off, but I really don't like the ending where she gets her sight back. She's completely human now, and she's got a complete personality twist. That's the thing is, like, she completely lost her personality as a villain. Maybe if she was still rough around the edges when she was good, I could, buy that a little bit more. But I just didn't like her. It just wasn't. She wasn't fun. And what I mean by a strong villain, like before, is like you had Elgar with Astronema. And Astronema was an awesome villain. Probably more so before she became a cyborg. If they had an actress that could play Tanaya like Astronema, I think we would have had a good set of villains. That did not happen. Therefore, RPM really kind of fails in all departments, from heroes to villains and whatnot. And I also want to get to Kilobyte. This guy, like everything else, had the potential of being a good villain. He really had the potential for being great. The problem that we have with him is that he's sexist for no damn reason. The episode he's introduced in, and I don't care to know the name because I hate RPM. I'm not going to remember the names for all these episodes. The episode he's introduced in, he was left behind. He walked thousands and thousands of miles to get back to Venjix, and he insults Tanaya. Okay, well, why is he insulting her? Is it because she's half human? He finds that cyborgs are inferior to completely machines, to machines? No. Is it the fact that he is the first general that he made and Tanaya is just, inferior model because she's newer? No. Kilobyte doesn't like Tanaya because she's a girl. That's the name of the episode, Dome Dolls. Dome Dolls, yes. Horrible, horrible episode, and it is kicked off by this notion that a robot, a cold and calculating robot, is sexist. Now, this isn't Bender. This is not Bender from Futurama, where they have these comedic robots that have these interesting personalities. No. This is a robot that is a straight-up villain, is pure evil, and really a bigger threat than Tanaya ever was, in my mind. And the first thing he does is he insults her for being a girl, says that she's weak because she's a girl. He sabotages her plans because she's a girl. I don't know how to calculate or articulate any of this. I mean, it's just absurd. The whole episode is supposed to be pro-feminism and all that, but the whole problem with the episode is that it fails because the women fail and needs the men to save them. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that episode eventually, but yeah, I don't understand why having a robot who is sexist was so integral and important to the plot. It just doesn't make any sense. And just to end this, I'm going to talk about Venjix. I don't know if he is connected to the Shadowborg incarnation they had in Forever Red, and I really don't care. Because you know what? I am glad RPM is a separate universe from the normal Power Rangers continuity. Because Venjix is the laziest, dumbest artificial intelligence ever. And that's saying a lot, because he's worse than Skynet. Terminator Salvation really showed how lazy Skynet is. And Venjix is worse than that. He has this entire army at his command. He's got one damn city he needs to destroy, and he can't do it. Some people say that the reason that he is incompetent, he has incompetent generals, is because he was created by an 8-year-old, was created by Dr. K, and does have those fallacies of a child and whatnot and stuff. But I don't buy it. Because if he's smart enough to trick her, to grow beyond his own programming, which he does, he should be a much more serious threat. And I guess maybe it's the rules of the universe that they're in, because, it's not part of main Power Rangers continuity, thank goodness. But he was just so... He's entrusting cyborgs. I mean, he has, from what we understand, Corinth is the only remaining city on Earth. There's no aid from outside alien force, and he now controls the entire planet. If you really want to get rid of these guys, why don't you send your 6 billion Crybots, or I don't think they're Crybots, wherever they are, send your entire army to destroy Corinth in one swoop. Don't always send a monster of the day in there, or send 20 of them in there. It made sense when Rita was doing it, and made sense when Rancic was doing it. We had good explanations, but there's no good explanation for why Venjix does half the things he does. So again, that just makes him a terrible villain, and those he created were terrible as well. I'm surprised the RPM Rangers even won in the end, but hey, there you are. Well, that's all I have to go ahead and say. I apologize for the length of the video this week, but I really did have a lot to say. I want to thank Connor again for giving me this topic. It really helped me springboard to say a lot more, and I really hope you guys got something out of it. If my list is different from yours, keep in mind this is all opinion. But hey, please post in the comments what your favorite villains are, the worst villains are. And if you have a different point of view than me, hey, go ahead and let me know. And again, if you have a question you would like me to go ahead and discuss on my next podcast, post it down there or email me. The email is in the description or right on your screen. So you guys have a good night. Thank you for listening. And now the tavern is closed. Bye.